Good afternoon, everyone. Now we have a talk show. I have immense pleasure to welcome Mr. Shehan Karunatilaka, the Booker Prize winner of the year 2022, for this function. And I also welcome Srimati Suneetha Balakrishnan to talk to him. I also welcome Honorable Speaker, Mr. An Shamsir.
Next, Honorable Speaker will honor our chief guest by adorning him with the traditional ponnada. Honorable Speaker will also present a memento. A memento is also for the anchor of the show. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we begin this Meet the Author show, a few words as introduction. This is the third program of its kind on this International Book Fair. And this time we have a superstar on the show. It's none other than the prestigious Booker Prize winner, Mr. Shehan Karunatilaka. And this is Mr. Karunatilaka's first visit after winning this award. So the Kerala Legislative Assembly is extremely privileged and honored for host him in this wonderful international literary event. Karunatilaka, the renowned Sri Lankan writer, was born in Gale, Sri Lanka. He then moved to New Zealand for his higher studies. And he has worked in London, Amsterdam, and Singapore. Apart from writing, Mr. Karunatilaka has also stamped his presence in rock songs, screenplays, travel stories. The Booker Prize winning novel, that is The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida, is a metaphysical thriller depicting the story of a war photographer. And Mr. Karunatilaka is also a cricket lover, as is evident from his debut 2010 novel, Chinaman, The Legend of Pradeep Matthew, which also won the Commonwealth Prize. And we all know about the famous cricketing legend from Sri Lanka, Muthaiya Muralitharan. A film was made on the story of Muralitharan, 800 Murali story. That was also penned by Mr. Karunatilaka. And I don't want to delay the program by going deep into the life and works of our chief guest, because we have Srimati Suneetha Balakrishnan, a famous freelance journalist, anchoring this show, who is an ardent follower of his works. So the stage is all yours, madam. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. It's so good to have Shehan back in Kerala and sitting with our honorable speaker of all people. And in this assembly hall is something that doesn't have access, like we don't have access to it. usually. So this is an even more honorable occasion for all of us that we are able to get inside, and to sit on this podium is really wonderful. So welcome, Shehan, back to Kerala, and a huge congratulations from Kerala on your Booker win.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So let me quote from Shehan's Booker acceptance speech first, just a short. This is what he said, his hope for 7 moons in the future. I quote, "My hope for 7 moons is this, that in the not too distant future, 10 years, or as long as it takes, Sri Lanka has understood that these ideas of corruption and race baiting and cronyism have not worked and will never work." So Shehan, tell me, in May 2021, your country had a huge crisis. So how much optimism did your Booker win give to Sri Lanka? What do you think?
Well, I think, firstly, wonderful to be here. Last time I was being interviewed by Suneetha was before the pandemic in Mathrubhumi.
2020.
And yeah, it was a similar book, but it was a slightly different book we were talking about. And yeah, a lot has happened. A lot has happened to me, and a lot has happened to Sri Lanka since then. What a year it's been. What a year it's been. And we, 6 months ago, the country was on the streets. There was no gas, there was no petrol, and yeah, we were standing in queues, and this was the reality. And I think amidst all of that, we had Sri Lanka cricket won the Asia Cup, the netball team won the Asia Cup, Hiran Abesurya, one of our actors, won an Olivier Award, and then this Booker thing happened. So I suppose, yes, we've had things to celebrate, and yeah, it did bring some optimism, and there was a lot of love and celebration. But of course, Sri Lanka, the worst is not still over. It's more stable than it was 6 months ago, but there's a lot of challenges ahead. So that's what Sri Lanka is going through at the moment. But yeah, we take the victories wherever we can get it, I suppose. Not against the Indian cricket team, sadly. Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with the writing journey. We have gone over this for so many times, but I think it's worth repeating here, for the document at least. They are going to put this into the archives, so it is well worth what a Booker winner did, and a Booker winner from South Asia did to reach the Booker. It's a great thing for all of us, from here. So tell us, how did your writing journey start?
So this one took a good 7 years to write. 7 moons took 7 years, and it was a struggle. And I think the thing is, when you're a South Asian writer, you don't expect to be published worldwide. This is not something you take for granted, especially if you're writing in Colombo. And now my first book, which is on the table, Chinaman, it was a book about a unheard of Sri Lankan left-arm leg spinner who played in the 80s. And I wrote it, I did my best, but I didn't really expect anyone to be reading it in the UK or the US. I think for Sri Lankan writers, our hope is that we get published in India, because India is the publishing center for the subcontinent. And I was lucky enough to Chiki Sarka of Random House picked it up, and it came out in India. So I was quite pleased with that. And then it happened to win a few awards, and yeah, suddenly it was being read in Seattle, and I remember I went on a book tour there, and a lady who's never watched cricket asked me, "What do you think of Muralidharan's action?" So obviously it had traveled quite far. But that said, I really struggled with this book, to one, to finish it, and one, to find any interest outside of India for it. So I was a bit tired of writing about cricket, because I'd been talking and speaking about cricket for so long, and also Sri Lankan cricket was in decline, and I'd stopped watching it. So I thought I want to do something completely different, so that I don't get asked to do any more cricket assignments. So that's why I thought I'd write a ghost story. And I started this around I started thinking about it 2011, 2012, 2013. So this was, we forget, this was quite an optimistic period. This was the post-war period. We thought, okay, the country is now done with this 30-year civil war, and we can move forward and develop as a nation. Little did we know where we'd be 10 years from then. But when I started thinking about it, it just seemed like the wounds of the war had not been healed, had not been resolved. There was a lot of arguments. There was a lot of arguments over civilian casualties, whose fault it was, who's to blame. And I found this quite disappointing. I thought, why are we still squabbling? Can't we look at the causes, have some reconciliation? But instead, there was these battles of the documentaries. And I think my idea then was, what if we could allow the dead to speak? The victims of Sri Lanka's wars, what if we could allow them to speak? What would they have to say about Sri Lanka and what it's done to them and where it's got to? So hence I thought a ghost story. But it went through many. Initially, it was a tsunami. It was around the tsunami time. It was a bus full of aid workers traveling around the tsunami coast. One by one, they were getting killed. And, someone should write this story. I think it's a great idea, but I couldn't finish it. I couldn't make it work. And I put it aside and wrote some short stories. I wrote some children's books, as you do. I mean, I think this is the thing that the writers here will recognize. It takes just as long to write a bad book as it does to write a good book. It still takes about 2-3 years, and it's demoralizing when you finish it and you realize, oh, this is not quite working. But then when I came back to it, there's a drone also watching us.
He's our drone.
He's our drone, not someone else's. Okay, that's good. Okay. Then when I came back to it, I realized, okay, this thing is a mess, but there's one interesting aspect. There's a ghost on the bus called Mali Almeida, a dead war photographer who is a minor character. And I thought, actually, let's put this aside. Let me write a story about Mali Almeida, the war photographer. How did he turn up dead? Who killed him? And so that led to this book. And it initially was Chats with the Dead. I think this is when we met in Mathrubhumi in 2019, Chats with the Dead. And this is the other thing. So I finished Chats with the Dead. It was about Mali Almeida, the war photographer, going around the afterlife. He was an atheist, a nihilist, and he wakes up and he finds out, oh my God, there's an afterlife and there is rules, and he interviews all the ghosts, and that's why Chats with the Dead. And meanwhile, he's also trying to solve his own murder. So I did this, and it came out in the subcontinent. It was reviewed reasonably well, and it was read, but I couldn't find a publisher outside of the UK, especially. A lot of people who were fans of Chinaman, who had published my previous work, said this is a very confusing, difficult book. Even my agent said, well, it's Sri Lanka, tiny country, everyone's forgotten about your wars. You shouldn't be worried. The Americans aren't going to want this book. So, it was quite demoralizing then. And so I found sort of books. Natanya Jans, who I owe everything to, they're a small indie publisher. They publish, travel guides and a bit of fiction.
She's a Sri Lankan, I think, isn't it?
Natanya Jans, she's grown up, lived in England all her life, but yes, her dad was Sri Lankan and she's from a Sri Lankan family. So she also was the ideal editor. She was a tremendous editor, but also had some knowledge of Sri Lanka, some experience with it. But what she told me is, I think it's got a lot of potential, but it needs a lot of work, because simply, one thing, the Sri Lankan political situation of 1989, which I was writing about, was particularly complex. We had a civil war, the Sri Lankan army versus the LTT. Then we had a Marxist uprising with the JVP against, and the counter-terrorist death squads. And you also had the Indian peacekeeping force, which was, and so at that time, I was a teenager. I wasn't very politically aware, but I was certainly aware of dead bodies on the sides of the road when you were going to school. And no one knows where they were from. No one knows who they were. And there were so many, it could have been anyone. It could have been a JVP, LTT, or someone suspected of that. So I think But
you lived in Colombo at that time, during the 89, 90s?
I lived in Colombo.
Okay.
But also Colombo was very
insulated, I think.
We had bomb blasts, and it was full of checkpoints, we had assassinations, we had troubles, but compared to Jaffna, Trincomalee, Batticaloa, the north and the east, where the war was raging, I think we almost pretended that the war was happening in another country. I never visited Jaffna till I was 35 years old, even though I lived in the country all my life. And so I think one thing was, Natanya said, we need to clarify for a Western reader who doesn't know any of this, you need to clarify who these different parties are. Also, I think the mythology. Now, we take for granted ideas of demons and pretas and rebirth and so on. All those rules had to be clarified. So I think that's where we started. But of course, the pandemic was happening at the time. So once we had clarified that, suddenly we realized, okay, 2020, no one's publishing books, so we have another year to edit. So then we ended up performing a lot of surgery on the book. So it was 2 years of editing before it finally came out as The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida. But obviously, I mean, it was quite demoralizing to rewrite a book for 2 years that you think is already done.
I want to ask about that. I mean, you have already published a book. It's out there. It's been noticed. But when you have to rewrite the same book for an audience which is not familiar with your country, how difficult was that?
Well, of course it's difficult, but also I come from advertising. I'm a copywriting, that's my day job. So you're used to, you think you have cracked the brief and you've done a great ad, and the client will always come back with marks saying, you know, you got to do it again. And when you're younger, you go and sulk in a corner and you curse the client and yourself and all that. But I think when you get more mature, you realize, okay, this is the process, and let's see if I can take the comments and if you go in with the good attitude, you know, each time you revise a piece of writing, whether you're doing copywriting, whether you're writing a 400-page novel, even if you're, you know, writing an article or a shopping list, I think each time you rewrite it, it gets better. And so I think I was aware of that, and I knew that Netanya was her points were valid and all that. So yeah, it was tough work, but I did realize that with each edit, the book got better, it got tighter, and so while it was difficult, I think it was time well spent, because obviously it paid off in the end.
So what was the technique you employed to, introduce Sri Lanka and Sri Lankans' issues and geography to a global reader? I mean, in Kerala and in entire India, we are familiar with our Ceylon or Sri Lanka. So it's fine. I mean, we know what's happening over the wall, and it was good with us. We were happy to read whatever was there and understand it. But in the West, it is entirely different. So what technique was that? I mean, this is one question so many people have asked me to make you speak out. Okay. So would you give something on that?
Well, I think, okay, that was only one aspect of it. Also, this is quite a complicated book in that there are a lot of moving parts. So at the basic level, it's a murder mystery. A guy has 7 days to find out who killed him. But also, it's a political thriller because this guy is a war photographer who was taking photographs for the army, for the LTT, for the J, all the people that I mentioned. He was in. So I mean, this is the classic murder mystery technique. You know, you have a dead body, you have about 4, 5, 6 suspects who could have had reasons for wanting them dead.
And he's investigating his own murder.
And he's from beyond the grave, yes, yes. And then, of course, I have to have a vision of the afterlife. There's a ghost story aspect to it. There's also a love story at the heart of it. There's a love triangle, which of course takes a deeper significance later in the book. And also there's a bit of philosophizing. There's a few jokes. So there was a lot of things happening at once. So I think what Netanya sort of said is just make sure all the instruments aren't playing at once and it's not too noisy. And perhaps Chats with the Dead, there was a lot happening at once and readers were getting lost. So I think just that was a pure, writing to just make sure that, and little things like that. Maybe you take 50 pages to say something which you can say in 20 pages. So things like that. But I think to clarify, say, the politics and all that, there's early on, I mean, maybe we can read later from it, there's a chapter where he gives notes to a visiting journalist about who each person is. And in very short sentences, he sums up who is the LTT, who is the IPKF, and so on. So little techniques like that. Even in Chinaman,
the first 50 pages had some cheat notes there, I remember that.
So that was the other thing. Now, I think any book you write, if it's a good book, it should be someone on the other side of the planet should be able to pick it up, not know you, not know your country, not know anything, and have an experience with it. If they need to study to read it, then perhaps, the book's not as effective as it should be. So with Chinaman, I thought, if someone has never heard of cricket, never heard of Sri Lanka, they should still enjoy the book. So in Chinaman, there are little diagrams of what is a bat, what is a ball, what is an in-swinger, out. So I just had that and tried to keep them entertaining so that by 50, 100 pages, the reader knows whatever they need to know. So similar technique here. Still a lot of people say the first 50 pages are a bit confusing and all that. But I think that's the point. The guy's woken up dead, he's confused. So I think I wanted to put the reader in the mind of my character who's woken up and has to now discover what to do in this afterlife. But that said, yeah, you have little signposts that make sure they don't get lost. So I mean, yeah, it's easy to talk about now, but this is each signpost took like months to craft and put together. But I think it's worth doing, you know, when people say that your book is not working and your initial reaction is, well, you don't understand it, someone else will. But I think once you get over that, this is, if enough, there's a saying I think in editing and in life, if enough people tell you you're drunk, you probably need to sit down. And I think enough people were finding this confusion. So I think I listened and did it.
So what I found interesting about 7 Moons was that, see, you have told the story of Sri Lanka in 2 books. I mean, it's the ostensible story is about a cricketer, a lost cricketer being chased. And here it is about a war photographer trying to find his own murderer. But you are talking about Sri Lanka's pains, Sri Lanka's chaos, Sri Lanka's distress. Okay, so for that you have used this as a tapestry. You know what we call Trishangu here. I don't know whether you have that word over there. It is that world above earth, but not quite heaven. You know, where you stay in between. You have talked about that particular place, that space which your characters are placed in. That they are not alive, but they act like they have brought their sensibilities from their life. So that is what your characters are all about. That is why we are able to connect with it. And you've also used a second-person narrator, and that is very unusual in English. And that makes you either connect or totally disconnect. So how hard was that, writing it in you in that format? How hard was that?
So these are all technical, this is all problem solving, because I watched a lot of horror movies. I mean, I love my research, and I think the books I do is where I'm interested in the research. First book, I had to just watch a lot of cricket matches and hang out with some drunks. So it was enjoyable research. This one, I watched a lot of read ghost stories, watched horror movies. But what I found is none of them were useful, because in most ghost stories, you don't see the ghost till the end. You don't see the ghost. But this, you see the ghost on page 1, who says, "Hi, I'm a ghost. This is my story." And so I had to envision, what does the afterlife look like? What are the rules? Can a ghost, so there are a few rules, like a ghost can only travel where their body has been, where their name is spoken, and wherever they can catch certain winds. And so we had these like rules, but also the idea that the afterlife is a bureaucracy. It is not,
that was the most impressive part.
Well, that took a, because I was trying to think, we have this illusion that when we die and we breathe our last, we will open our eyes and the universe will be revealed and everything, all the questions will be answered. I mean, it's a nice thought, but I thought it perhaps makes more sense that you wake up and
go into a visa office for your visa
confused.
to heaven.
You wake up, you have a piece of paper saying, go to counter number 42, you go there, person has gone to lunch, so you have to go and sit here, then you have to get it stamped here. And the idea that Sri Lanka is full of these spirits who, because I borrowed a lot of this from mythology, from even near-death experiences.
Yes.
You know, a lot of near-death experiences, they describe the light. You know, there was the light and there was a figure asked me to walk into the light. So I used this idea that, okay, before you walk into the light, you had to get your visa stamped and you had to get your sins ticked off and so on. So that bureaucracy, one thing, it was absurd enough and humorous enough that I could have fun with it, but it also made sense that there are all these confused spirits walking around. So that was the first aspect of problem solving. Second one was the second person. I wondered, okay, what does a disembodied spirit sound like and look like? But usually when you're talking about your hero, you describe them and all that. Now this guy doesn't have a body. His body is being chopped up and put in a lake in the opening scene. So what remains? And it took me a long while to kind of come to terms with that and come up with a solution. But my solution was that if anything survives the death of your body, it is the voice in your head. And the voice in your head, who knows what it could be, the voice of your conscience, your soul, previous births, whatever. But the voice in my head is in the second person. I don't know everyone else's heads. Just have a think of what the voice in your head sounds like. For me, it's always in the second person, saying, maybe you should wrap up this question now let Suneetha ask another one. There's a voice talking to me right now, sitting on my shoulder. And this made sense. So this guy is here and he has this you, like almost someone else talking to him. It was difficult to do because you're right, you don't get many second-person narratives. You get a few short stories. Bright Lights, Big City by J. McInerney is the famous example, but not too many others. But I guess the test is, I used that technique and immediately the pages started flowing. I had 50, 60, 70 pages going. So I thought maybe this is something I can use. So it's, and another point is like now they have the audiobook. And the audiobook, the narrator, very skilled guy called Shivanta Vijay who's done a tremendous job. But he has a slightly different voice when he's doing the you narration. The flashback scenes when Mali Almeida is in his life talking, it's a slightly different voice. So it's almost like the voice in your head is slightly separate from the human being that you are. So these were all, philosophical things that came later. But initially I just thought the voice in his head is in the second person and let's see if I can write it. And usually if the thing is working, the pages flow, and so I just went with it. Yeah.
So does Mali Almeida have a leftist ideology in mind? Is he a leftist ideologue?
Well, you have to ask him. I think you have to read the book.
No, that's what the Kerala people are saying right now. We are identifying some of his thoughts with the left ideology.
Well, you think of the left in Sri Lanka. The left doesn't believe in rebirth.
No, that's true, but in that, the narrator doesn't say he's getting rebirth. He's just finding it out.
Maybe the left believes in the rebirth of society and politics, but not the individual. I don't know. So now you look at the left in Sri Lanka. We had a very strong leftist movement in the 60s and the 70s, in the 50s, and they were quite instrumental in Mrs. Bandaranayaka's government and so on. And I feel it's the violence of the JVP that really killed the left literally killed the left in Sri Lanka. We had the 71 uprising, 89 uprising. And now the JVP still exists in politics, but they are certainly not a force. They are very kind of weak third party there. And Mali Almeida didn't come out of purely my imagination. I used a lot of unsolved murders from 1989, and one of them was a gentleman called Richard de Soisa, he was not a war photographer or anything, but there's a lot of similarities there. Again, left-leaning and many rumors that he was affiliated with the JVP, though there's a lot of opinions on that. But in '89 we did get a case where a lot of young, radical, left-leaning youth were disappeared and never seen again. And so, now Richard de Soisa, certainly you can say that of him. Mali Almeida, I think it's there in the book where he leaned. I think he was just, he found something he was good at, which was being a photographer. And he also felt this guilt that he was living in this Colombo bubble while these atrocities were happening. So he naively thought if he could go around and photograph and document these things, that maybe the violence will stop. But I don't want to comment too much on Mali's politics. Perhaps he was left-leaning, perhaps he was, I think it's a bit more complex than that. It almost seems like he didn't trust anyone. Right at the beginning when he talks, he says, don't look for the good guys in this country, because there aren't any. It's all bad guys, and just try and stay safe and keep alive. That's what his advice to another journalist is. So I think he may have been sympathetic to the left, but he saw the flaws. He may have been sympathetic to the Tamil separatist cause, but also he saw the flaws in all of these movements. They start off with a worthy cause or an admirable aim, and then they end up becoming as fascist, as corrupt as the thing that they're trying to destroy. So I think, in the end, I think he was more of a nihilist. He didn't believe that anything worked, and this sort of informed his worldview, and his worldview of the universe. He didn't believe that there could be a God, that there could be any afterlife or anything, because he looked at all the horrors happening, goes, how can there be anyone in charge? And then he wakes up to find out that the opposite is true. So that, I suppose that's his journey.
The loss of democracy, rather, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in '89 there wasn't, we were in name, we had a democracy, but of course, freedom of expression, freedom of political association and all that. were not there, and it was a very dangerous place to be. So I don't know, Mali's politics, I think it's there in the pages. I don't want to really...
No, why did you, I mean, I've asked this before, but for the record, I'm asking again. Why did you choose the 80s and 90s to write about? See, you have a crisis right now. So maybe you could have written about this and gone back. So was there a reason why you wrote about the 80s and 90s?
If I wrote about today, could I have gone back? That is the other question. I suppose, okay, one thing is that's the time I was growing up. And I was a teenager, I was a child, and I was aware that the country was in trouble, and I could see the fear and the anxiety on my parents, uncles, and aunties' faces. But I didn't quite know what was going on. I suppose the first book was just, I wanted to write about 1996. The 1996 World Cup, which we were discussing, all Arjuna and Roshan Mahanama and Arvind and all this golden age, and we had another golden age after that. For me, it was fascinating that in the midst of all this chaos and this war, we won a World Cup. And this was just complete, and also it was a lovely underdog story. I don't think it'll ever be like that again. Now people expect, even Sri Lankans, we expect them to win, or we are disappointed if they don't. At that time, no one expected Sri Lanka to win, and everyone rallied around the one Tamil player in Muthaiya Muralidharan, because there was questions of his action, and the whole country rallied around him and rallied around the team. And so it proved that even though the country was divided, we were capable of unifying, even for a moment, and doing something great. And so that's the reason why Chinaman was set in the 90s, because I think, it's 1996 to 1999, that era where we were playing at our peak. But this one had a much more, I suppose, cautious reason for going to the 80s. I was initially wanting to write about 2009, the end of the war, or the last decade. But I thought, and not without reason, commenting on those things did land. It did get journalists killed in broad daylight, disappeared, and so on. And I'm not a political writer. Like, I really, even though I've been kind of cast that way after the success of this, and with the Aragalaya, I really think I'm a genre writer. These are two detective stories. The first one is a missing person story, two detectives tracking down a missing person. And the Seven Moons is a murder mystery. And so I don't set out trying to write a big commentary about Sri Lanka. I'm actually just trying to write a mystery story, but I end up digressing and talking about these things. But those were the reasons. I was fascinated by 89 because I remembered it, and then I went back and I researched and I talked to people who were in the front lines affected by it. And also with the first book, I was interested in 96. So I will probably write about the Aragalaya, but it might take me to 2040. You'll have to invite me back to Kerala in 2040 and we can write about it. So I'm a bit of a slow writer. I've written 2 books in 15 years, so maybe I need to speed up.
10 years is your time for a book.
Hopefully I'll be faster. My children are a bit grown up now and better behaved, so
but
maybe.
That's a classic time, Marilyn Robinson writes a book every 10 years. And she goes places. So obviously that's a good role model. Okay. So, but talk to us about Muthaiya Muralidharan. You've written a screenplay on his biopic. So tell us more about it.
So, like I said, I didn't want to do any more cricket assignments, and but they kept coming. 1996, I've been asked to co-write a documentary about 1996, which we're working on. But this came right after I met you at Mathrubhumi, so that would have been January 2020, 2020. February 2020. So right after that, so we remember March, the pandemic happened, and I used to travel to Singapore to earn my livelihood. I used to travel for a few months and freelance, and suddenly, planes aren't going, and I got a bit worried, what am I going to do now? And this opportunity came, the director of 800, the Murali story. It's a Tamil movie. M.R. Sripati was the first-time director. He met me, and he'd written the screenplay, and he said, I've read Chinaman. I'm not quite sure I've got the screenplay. Can you come and help me, just give me some pointers? And I ended up being a co-writer on that. And I'm not an experienced screenwriter. And look, screenplays are just as difficult as novels, and probably a lot more heartbreaking. Because a novel, you finish it, even if you have to write it 10 times, it's your name on the cover and you're done. Screenplay, you finish it and then director changes, producer changes, actor changes. Who knows how it'll turn out? It's out of your control. But I was interested in this project for a couple of reasons. One is, okay, Murali was a great cricketer, but there was, even in his cricketing legacy, on one hand, he has taken 800 test wickets, and he is, inarguably the greatest bowler of all time. But then there is a segment who also believes still that his action was illegal and his wickets were illegal, and therefore he shouldn't be thought of as. So that was interesting to navigate that aspect. And the guy was, every time Sri Lanka gave him the ball, I mean, there was him and Chaminda Vas, right? We didn't have now we have a much more varied bowling attack, but then it was just you give Murali the ball and you expect him to take 5 wickets. If he doesn't take 5 wickets, it's a failure. So that pressure. But while he's taking his wickets all around the world, there is this, he had to go and get his action checked and so on. So I was interested in what the toll on the man, because on the pitch he's always smiling, but surely that must have taken a toll, having to prove yourself every time you bowl and having the crowd say no ball. So that was one aspect. But the other intriguing aspect was, as a Tamil, he's a very divisive figure. Because, like I said, he was the one Tamil in this predominantly Sinhalese dressing room that everyone got behind. But I think a lot of the Tamil people say that he didn't speak up for us. He never spoke in Tamil in public. He never spoke up for us. And then after he retired, Murali is a very complex character, but he's done a lot of charitable work, built a lot of houses and so on. And as such, he has sat on stages with certain politicians who are, part of the regime. And so therefore, he has had a lot of criticism from his community saying, how can he be sitting with these people and all that? So so that was interesting to me. Was he a great bowler? Was he a fraud? Was he the person who unified this divided nation, or was he a traitor to his race? And so, of course, the cricket story is also interesting, how this boy from Kandy became the greatest bowler in the world for a time. So all these factors were, let's see how the movie turns out. Like I say, I don't know, but they got some good actors, and I saw some of the footage. They're keeping it under wraps, but we'll find out this year. So hopefully that should come out and should be interesting.
I think we have only some time left, isn't it? Some 10, 15 minutes. Yeah, so I'll ask my main questions again. So one technique, again, you have used very, I won't use the word cunning, but very, very nicely, I'll tone it down, is the use of Sri Lankan English. See, what I found is the Sri Lankan war stories have been told by your predecessors in eloquent, poetic prose, Ramesh Gunashekara, Ondache, all those people. Ondache, of course, hasn't written that, but all the other writers just before you have written a lot about Sri Lankan Civil War. And as late as 2 years ago, Arudhu Prakasham has written. But the thing is, they have used a Western sensibility English. So that actually appeals to the West, but to people who are from the region, South Asia, we are more familiar with different forms of English. So it was a very interesting use of Sri Lankan English that conveyed what was happening on the ground. So did you do that on purpose? Was that a conscious decision?
Well, certainly. I was writing, I started thinking about writing in the early 90s. And then, as you rightly mentioned, Michael Ondaatje won the Booker Prize. And the English patient wasn't much about Sri Lanka, but he wrote about Anil's ghost running in the family about Sri Lanka. And this is a world-class writer writing about Sri Lanka. So obviously, we were all proud of that. And Ramesh Gunasekara, elegant writer who writes Reef and Monkfish Moon were the books then. Another writer is Shyam Selvadurai, who wrote Funny Boy. So these were the guys who were writing at the time and who I was kind of looking up to. And I suppose as a young writer, it's quite intimidating. You're never going to write as elegantly as Ramesh Gunasekara or Ondaatje. But at that time, there was another writer who, I guess he's been published in India, but mainly widely read in Sri Lanka, a gentleman called Carl Muller. Carl Muller...
Jamun tree.
The Jam Fruit Tree.
Jam Fruit Tree.
The Jam Fruit Tree and the Burger Trilogy. So that came out at the same time. I remember that book was a big revelation. And okay, before I go into him, of course, as a South Asian writer, I think all South Asian writers have this in common. When Midnight's Children came out, suddenly you say, okay, wow, you can tell a novel, an epic novel, in our own language. And then if you look at subsequent Booker winners, our very own Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, White Tiger, it uses our own sensibility. So I think those ideas were already there. But when I read Carl Muller, and it's the jam fruit tree is about the von Bloss family. This is the burger population, the only population that hasn't got violent in our country, and they stereotypically they are seen as eating, drinking, good people. They just get drunk, fight each other, have affairs with each other's spouses, and get into trouble. But the jam fruit tree, what was good? It wasn't certainly as elegant as Ondachi or Gunasekara, but it was how Sri Lankans spoke, how Sri Lankans, the story was told like an uncle telling you a story. So that was a great inspiration for me, because I thought I can perhaps never write as beautifully as Ondachi, but I can certainly write like a drunken uncle. I can certainly tell a story like a drunk Sri Lankan, or just an uncle telling a tall tale. So I think Carl Muller's influence is there certainly in all my work, and I think his influence is there if you look at Sri Lankan writing today. You have those now, Anuk Aruk Pragasam, certainly influenced by the masters, but you also have other writers who are, you look at Andrew Fidel Fernando, who writes for Cricinfo, you can see the Carl Muller influence in how he writes. So it wasn't something contrived, it's just something that liberated me.
It doesn't sound contrived. It actually brought Sri Lanka right to the West. I mean, otherwise Sri Lanka was just another country far away where something is happening, some people are being hurt. They don't know. I mean, even when things happen in India, it's like when our people write about it. See how Gitanjali Shri's partition story, when it was presented in a different way. Now people are all reading upon partition stories, and the Booker site has a separate video to educate the non-Indians about what partition was about. See, it's past, nobody knows about it, but our bruises are really, really raw even now, especially when you go towards north, not maybe perhaps in Kerala. But this sensibility, that transfer of sensibility into writing is important. I think how much of fiction conveys history is really important, because fiction is now documenting history in a way which is not being documented as such. Because history is being written by whoever rules. So our histories are being rewritten. So fiction is really important in how things are being conveyed. So I think this was a really roaring attempt, and it has succeeded. That is where your novel, I think, has got me as a reader. Okay, and let me ask you one more question. You have admitted to your, you're being influenced by pulp fiction and the comic tradition of Sri Lanka. Can you tell us more? The satire in your writing, the dark humor, and all these things. From where do these things come from? Which sort of reading does it come from? Your school for that?
So satire, pulp fiction, I remember reading, we read, Agatha Christie, James Hadley Chase, those books that I think all a region we read, but also we had a lot of Sinhala books about, some of them were a bit sketchy, but about bank robbers and crime novels and all that. And I've always been attracted to that, and I don't think, there is this perception that literary works are highbrow and genre works are lowbrow, but I think it's a well-written thriller is a thing of beauty and is as difficult to craft as a beautiful literary novel. So I've always had that respect for it. But I think the humor and the satire is, maybe it's my sensibility, but it's certainly a Sri Lankan way of looking at things. If you look at the last year, if you look at the Aragalaya, it was fought on the street, but also on social media. And the jokes, even in the grimmest time, the political cartoons, about mocking our leaders openly and making fun of it, this is something spectacular that perhaps would not have happened 10 years ago. Recently, a few days ago, we had Full Moon Poya, and one of the ruling family members said, "May the triple gem bless all Sri Lankans on this day." And then you look at the comments, someone says, "I'm surprised your family hasn't stolen the triple gem by now." And this is like, you'd be scared for that person. And the comments are brave and they're hilarious, and maybe this is our coping mechanism. We either we laugh at each other or we kill each other. So better to laugh at each other and make jokes than to resort to violence. So I think this is something, even though Sri Lanka has been through a harrowing time, the last decade, the last 3-4 decades, it's not a grim place. It's not a depressing place. Anyone who's been there, anyone who's lived there knows it's a cheerful, for whatever reason. Maybe we need to get a bit more serious and a bit more, but we seem to be able to crack a joke. Even those petrol queues, we had 2 months of people my wife was sitting in a car for 4 days for a tank of petrol. But even there, they were funny places. People like sitting there playing cards, cracking jokes, and so on. So maybe this is part of the Sri Lankan sensibility, and it's something that I'm also attracted to. Because if I wrote a straight story about 1989, I mean, if you go to 1989, you research it, the real story is much more gruesome than anything in the book. But I think the absurdity, and there's always absurdity in Sri Lanka, I think the absurdity and the humor help us get through it. So yeah, again, it's not something you contrive and you do later, but it's just how the book tends to flow, and I think that's the way. There's always plenty of absurdity to draw on living in Sri Lanka, so I don't think I'll be short of material.
Okay, I think that's why Kerala loves you, because we also love our absurdities. We are famous for trolling ourselves. We troll all our masters, all our underlings. So this is a whole comic strip going on social media and our media all the time. So 2 last questions. One is about your children's literature, and the next is about your the novel that is coming up. I think we'll wrap up after that. It's almost time, I think. So these 2 questions, please.
Children's literature. So I brought them. Yeah, here are my children's books, Those Sneaky Plants, about what plants do when humans go to sleep. They have a very rich life. This is, I believe, my masterpiece, Where Shall I Poop? It's a potty training book for kids. I did this because, again, I think children's books are, I mean, I had 2 children while I was writing this, and yeah, perhaps why it took 7 years to write also. But I would read to my children every night, and then I'll try and write these novels. And I think me and my brother felt, there's a book called The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which I'm sure most parents have heard of, which sells 1 million copies every year. It was written in '67. So my brother and myself, we sat there reading this book thinking, forget trying to write literary books for 10 years which no one reads. Let's do a hungry caterpillar, sell 1 million copies, and then we are sorted. So we've set up this business, and every year we're writing 2. And also I've got 2 very book-loving but also impossible children. So that's my focus group. So yeah, at the moment I'm doing a book. I did one about plants. I'm doing a book about insects. I'm quite fascinated by insects. I believe they rule the planet and they'll be here when we are gone. And so I'm writing about insects. I'm writing about sleep. This is I like having multiple projects. If I just have one thing to do, I never do it. I watch YouTube or waste my time. If I have like 5 things to do, I might do 2 of them. So the children's book is one sort of diversion, and it's a business opportunity. The new novel, yes, I started it earlier this year, and then I've been sort of distracted by Aragalayas and Booker Prizes. So hopefully I can do some writing tomorrow. But I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about it. It's bad luck to talk about a book that hasn't been written. But it'll be about Sri Lanka. It'll be about absurdity. There won't be any cricket or any ghosts in it or any dead bodies. It'll be a much more
No
lighter.
more dead bodies.
Not for now. Yeah.
Okay. So shall we wrap now? 5 more minutes. Okay. So there was. Do you want to say anything? I mean, about your Booker journey, like how life has been after the Booker?
Well, you can see from my sleep
Yes,
deprivation,
yes.
you know, how tired I look. I met the great Mr. Damon Galgut, Widow for the Promise, and he sat next to me. He looked exhausted. And he said, my friend, you're not going to write another word for the next 12 months, but, you know, enjoy it and stay healthy and stay sane. Well, the journey has been, look, for me, the big victory is finishing a book. Finishing a book, you put it out there, and you have this silent, almost prayer that you say, okay, I've done my best. Maybe no one will read it. Maybe no one will like it, but I've done my best. Hopefully someone will read it and like it. You hope, because it's out of your control. And that was my attitude when it was finished earlier this year. And we knew it was coming out in August. And I know it wasn't getting reviewed. We were trying to get reviews. People were saying, yeah, maybe we'll do it, maybe
Chats.
we won't.
It's
No,
about-
it was 7 months.
7 months. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Until, and then August, my wife was in a petrol queue. I was taking the kids to school, and I got this frantic call saying, we made the long list and all that.
Okay.
And so then I was like, okay, the book is at least going to be reviewed. It'll get some sort of a launch. And then I looked at the long list there, and this time the long list, the judges had a taste for kind of weird stuff. They don't always have, the previous year they look for, some
Very
years they look for
sanitized normally. quite sanitized actually.
Well, it depends. I mean, some years the judging is very kind of realistic fiction, but this time they were into some weird stuff. And also, there were no big names. It was all about, I mean, maybe Elizabeth Strout, Percival Everett perhaps, but there weren't any big names there. I tried to order the long list, but books were not an essential service in Sri Lanka. We need petrol and gas, so I couldn't get any other books. But you know, now there's BookTube and BookTok, and there are all these things where the passionate readers are, you know, perhaps replacing the traditional reviewers now. And so I engaged with that, and then I knew there's 14 quality books here, and I'm lucky to be among these 14, and you kind of accept that, and then suddenly you make it to the short list. So then I was like, okay, 1 in 6, this is good, but I wasn't thinking of winning. I thought, okay, let's go to England and be part of the circus and meet some great writers and then have a holiday. And then, so I think each time, and you have to see this as a lottery, because it is, I mean, a different set of judges could have picked, and all of those 6 books were quality. So on the day of the Booker, I was actually hoping, you know, not hoping, but I was just expecting someone else's name to be read out, and then I can finish my dinner and go home and get on with my life. And but of course, that's not what happened. My name got called, and then suddenly it's been chaos since. I guess the big difference is everyone wants to talk to you. Writers, usually we sit in a room, we don't talk to anyone. We don't hardly talk to our wife or our children. We sit there talking to ourselves for like years. Now I wake up, there's 40 emails and there's 3 phone calls. Sorry, I haven't returned your text also from 2 weeks ago. But forgive me, I eventually will. But yeah, so I think that's the difference. And it's been, the first month was chaos. It's died down a bit, but I think now, January, February, I was in Dhaka 2 days ago, and now I'm here. I'll be in Jaipur next week. So I'm on this circus, and, but you know, you've got to be grateful for it. This is, you know, we expected the book to come out in anonymity. Now it's being published in 26 languages, and I'm being invited everywhere. So, you know, I am grateful, but I think, yeah, I need to get my sleep. I think this is good advice. Even as a novelist, the best thing you can do is get a good 7-8 hours sleep, and your writing will be better. So, yeah, I'm a bit behind on that.
Okay, since you mentioned a lottery, I should wrap with the question on your latest book. I mean, this book came out even after 7 Moons, and it came out in India first. It's coming out in the UK next month, I think, isn't it? Little Brown is bringing out.
Sometime this year.
The Birth, Lottery, and Other Surprises, isn't it? So normally any anthology would be titled, the title story and other stories. So how come it was this Another Surprises? The book is really a surprise. It is a different format. You have played with structure, you have played with language, everything. So I think, I felt you have found your grounding, and now you're ready to experiment. Was it that?
So the short stories were supposed to come out next year or the year after, but then suddenly this Booker hype started and everyone wanted to say, no, let's put it out now. The short stories, you have a copy, great. I'm going to steal this. Yeah, so this short story, like I say, I have multiple projects at the same time, so I wrote maybe 2-3 short stories a year just while I was struggling with the novel I wrote, and some of them are very, very short. Some of them are like in the form of text messages. So there's experimental stuff going on. But I just wrote just a couple just to amuse myself, I guess, every year. The Birth Lottery, again, another experimental story. But they're also like quite conventional stories. There are science fiction stories. And so it's more a compilation than a concept album, I would say.
It's a combination of diversity, actually.
Quite I think the common thread is they're all about Sri Lanka. And I suppose they're all absurd in a certain way. But yeah, this has also now come out at this time. And yeah, I wasn't sure how it will go down, because some of the stories are kind of far out there. But it was, in the end, I think you try on different voices, because with the novel, you're stuck with one sort of mode of telling. And so this is kind of a refreshing thing, a palate cleanser to just try out different things. So that's what Birth Lottery was as well. Hopefully this is for sale as well.
You don't have a copy yet?
Yeah, Dhaka, they mobbed me. They took all my books, yeah. And my mom's taken all the rest of my books. So yeah, I need to get some new copies. No, I won't steal yours. I'll buy.
No, we can take it.
That's fine.
Okay, so I think we are up on time. Yeah. Okay, so to make a wrap, thank you so much, Shehan, for being here with us. And this is an honor for Kerala Assembly, the Kerala government, and all of us readers here. And I hope you will be back again and again. with more honors, with more books, and to receive our love. Because I think Kerala is already adopting you as a Kerala. We have given you a dhoti. Come again, please. Thank you so much.
Oh, my
Thank you so
pleasure.
much,
Thank you
sir.
very much.